And it's time to take a look at the latest polls now with one of our favorite pollsters, John Zogby. John, thanks for so much for coming on the U.S. Report. I want to ask you about some of the latest numbers out there. One thing I'm absolutely fascinated by is this Quinnipiac poll, which shows Joe Biden with a 6-point lead over Donald Trump in a likely November matchup. Biden 50, Trump 44. Is this the female deficit that's hurting Trump? What's happening here? And is this an outlier, or is there something that Trump actually needs to be worried about?
Well, Trump should be worried about bleeding women voters, particularly suburban women voters. This poll does appear to be an outlier, though. And, it was just released yesterday. And if it was conducted most recently, I'd say, well, let's look for the next round of polls to see if it's upheld. Fact is, though, that it was conducted later last week, and there have been polls out that have been conducted since and still show a close race, a tie, or Trump ahead by 1 or 2.
Yeah, and so the other interesting thing about this, too, is that we could also be looking not at a two-way, but potentially 3 or more-way race here with independent Robert Kennedy still kicking around in the race and actually drawing, I think, a lot of support from both, interestingly, Democrats and Republicans. There's a lot of people on the right who are very interested in a lot of the things that he has to say. So that then shrinks it down to a 39-37% lead for Biden. Where does this send the Democrats? Are they going to be concerned about bleeding votes to Kennedy?
Oh, absolutely. Because on one hand, there are things that Bobby Kennedy says that are appealing to the right, particularly, the lack of trust in government and institutions. On the other hand, Bobby Kennedy, longtime successful environmental lawyer, and look, the scion of a Democratic family. So our polls are showing that Bobby Kennedy is actually drawing equally from Trump and Biden supporters.
Well, that's really, really interesting there. Now, what about, though, about Nikki Haley? Because she's still sticking around in the race, and we've got her also in another poll beating Biden by 5 points in a hypothetical head-to-head. Now, nobody seems to think that Nikki Haley is going to hang around much past South Carolina, and yet is this going to be the sort of poll that's going to create momentum for some of the people who are funding her, especially some prominent Democrats and people on the left, to keep shoveling money into that campaign as kind of a spoiler for Trump?
Well, James, all of the above. I don't see how she sustains a real campaign beyond South Carolina. The path to the nomination is closed after South Carolina. On the other hand, and I also don't see where it's good for her political future to stay in. She's alienated the MAGA movement, and as we're seeing, there isn't much of an anti-MAGA movement to create a critical mass for her. So with that said, yes, she could sustain funding by those moderate Republicans, those no labels kinds of folks that want to do some damage to Trump. But her capacity, I think, to do damage to Trump ends with South Carolina.